in and trying to really understand it, I like to look at multiple versions of it. So what I've done is I've got 3 different versions. We're going to start with the New International Version. And we'll do verse 5 first, and then we'll do verse 6. So the New International Version says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding." The New Living Translation, which I really like, I just like the way that generally the New Living reads, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not depend on your own understanding." And then we've also got what's called the Young's Literal Translation from 1898, I believe, and sometimes the way it flows is a little bit different, but sometimes you get a little bit different understanding from it. "Trust unto Jehovah with all thy heart, and unto thine own understanding lean not." There are many illustrations in the Bible that talk about not leaning on your own understanding. Sometimes God has us do things that don't make sense. Sometimes we have desires of our heart and we don't understand why God does not help, make that happen. And what I wanted to do this morning was kind of go through a few things that kind of illustrate this verse. Some of them are from the Bible, and some of them are from my own personal experience. But I ask that God please bless you guys through this morning. So the first one I want to talk about is in Noah, or the story of Noah. So imagine in your mind, you're talking to God. And this is not the first conversation you've had with God. This is a conversation you tend to have every day with God. "Lord, how are you this morning?" And just communing with God. And for context, Noah was, how old was Noah at this point when he first got the call? 500 and something? Let's put that in context. Right now it's 2023. 500 years ago, you had, Columbus had already landed. We didn't have Jamestown yet. That was only, a little over 400 years ago? So about 100 years before that. So some of the Spanish conquistadors may be coming over. This is how long Noah had already been alive. A long time. He had a long time to develop a relationship with God, but at the same time, all of a sudden, he has this conversation. "All right, Noah, this morning we've got a little bit of a talk. It's going to rain, there's going to be a flood, and you're going to build a boat." And I can just imagine the gears in Noah's brain starting to move around. "Okay, God, you're going to have to explain this to me. What is rain? What's a flood? And I've never in my 500 years seen rain or a flood. And you're telling me that I need to build a boat that's going to take me 120 years to build. Starting today. Okay. Okay. Now, if I'm in this position, I'm not sure I would have had the faith that Noah had. Are you sure, Lord? Now, I don't know exactly what Noah's reaction was, but he started building. It took 120 years to build it, and he still built it. He kept going, even though he had no idea what rain really was going to look like. What a flood was going to look like, nevertheless, a flood that was going to cover the whole world. It's like, whoa. We've got Abraham. Abraham gets the call. "All right, Abraham." Yeah, let me give some context here. where for our evening devotions with my kids, we've been reading, it's called the Laugh and Grow Children's Bible, I think, by Phil Vischer, the guy who created VeggieTales. And there was some insight that I'd never thought about at the time, which was that when Abram, before his name was changed to Abraham, when Abram was there, it was all about living together in a family group for protection. The bigger your group, the more protection you had, because there was a whole lot of lawlessness going on. So if you had a big enough family, no one was going to mess with you. And you stayed put. And so Abram's going along, he's got a big family in the land of Ur, and the book actually talks, kind of has fun with the word Ur. It's like, where do you live? Ur. No, really, where do you live? No. Anyway, sorry, I also have ADHD, so bear with me. So Abram is there in the city of Ur, living like, people did at that time, and all of a sudden God's like, all right, I'm going to make you a great nation, and you are going to leave the city. But it's safe over here. This is what God's asking. Does it make sense? If we lean on our own understanding, would God have been able, or if more accurately, if Abram had leaned on his own understanding in that moment, would he have become the father of a great nation that ended up bringing forth Jesus that saves us from our sins? I'm sure God could have made it another way, but would it have been through Abram? Had he not forsaken this leaning of his own understanding, he went against the culture of the time. Later on, we know the story of Abraham, that he ended up leaving and then went to Egypt. The whole thing with, oh, she's my sister. No. And it took forever. It's 100 years old. Has no kid. Has no kid with Sarah. But God is still saying, you're going to be the father of a great nation. Sarah's going to be the mother of a great nation. Sarah's 90. 90-year-old women don't necessarily have that many kids. It didn't make sense. Lean not on your own understanding. Obviously, these were words that were spoken in Proverbs many, many centuries later, but still the same concept of lean not on your own understanding. And what do you know? Boom, Isaac was born. When we first got our kids, I was 39 when we first got Max. And going through all of the changings and the kids waking up, when we got Zeke a few months later, feedings through the night, I was nowhere near 90-something, and oh my word, that was a struggle. I can only imagine one of them, Sarah, he's crying again. I'm 91, what do you want me to do? I don't move that fast. Stepping back in time just a moment, you think of Abraham having this thought of, this is what's coming. God is promising that in a year's time, we're going to be waking up. I'm going to be 101. He lived to be, 140 something? What was that? 175, sorry. I was off by a full 35 years. That's a long time. But even then, he had got the call. Okay, you're going to go. You're going to take your one and only son, and you're going to sacrifice them. Lean not on your own understanding. Trust in the Lord and lean not. Our next character here, if I can get my iPad to unlock here. Oh yes, Gideon. Gideon's thrashing wheat, trying to hide from the Midianites. All of a sudden, an angel shows up. Hey! He was needing to change his pants. Can you imagine trying to hide from everyone? You're afraid of getting caught, and all of a sudden there's someone just standing there, just staring at you. Greetings from the Lord! And all of a sudden, not only that, but Gideon's not exactly the one that's excited to go lead. He's hiding, trying to get this thing done, so his family can have food. And now there's an angel saying that he needs to raise an army. Are you sure? Yeah, we talk about putting on a fleece to find out something. That's our saying. And when we're I'm going to put on a fleece. This is where that story comes from. He literally, all right. So, Lord, are you sure you really want me to raise an whole army? He was speaking very clearly at that moment. All right, Lord. If you're sure you want me to do this, I'm going to put out this fleece, and then if the fleece is wet and the ground around it is dry, then I'll know that you were talking. And the next morning, oh, hey, that's what it was. Well, I know with my scientific mind that fleeces can be like sponges. I don't know if he has a sponge or not, but we're using our sanctified imagination at this moment, right? So if it's kind of spongy and it pulls the water, that would make sense that it would not be wet around. So that could have been a natural occurrence. So, okay, God, this time, if the fleece is dry and the ground around it is wet, then, okay, you're talking. Please let it be my imagination. Okay. Fine, Lord, I will trust you. I don't understand this, but okay. And even then, he starts getting his army. He gets thousands and thousands of people. All right, it was 33,000, if I remember right, that come to originally, and then, all right, tell everyone that wants to go home, go home. Wait, they have an army of how big, and you want me to make mine smaller? All right, if you want to go home, then go home. Okay. And I forget the number, something like, is it 23,000 people that go home out of the 33? So he's left with like 10,000. Lord, this is a really bad idea. Gideon, you got too many people. Oh, okay. Lean not on your own understanding. Okay. So, let's send them on a run. Let's go. So we're running and running. Oh, there's a creek. And God says, all right, the ones that are drinking water, where they're just lapping it up like a dog, send them home. The ones that are scooping it up so they're watching, those are the ones I want you to have stay. And Gideon's going along. No, 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 no. Yes! No, 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 no. Yes! So from 10,000, he goes down to 300. Lord, what are you doing to me? Now let's step out of the shoes of Gideon, and let's step into the shoes of one of the guys that's about to follow him. Okay, so we are going to be fighting the Midianite army that has thousands and thousands of people. We've got 300. And you are going to be fighting with, all right, I've got my sword, a pitcher, a torch, and a horn. Okay, where was sword there? Arrows, sword, shield, spear, slingshot? Any? Okay. But Gideon did say that he was getting the information from God. Do I trust in the Lord with all my heart and lean not on my own understanding? Or do I go, you're crazy, and run off? You have to imagine that this is a conversation that's going on. But apparently all 300 stay. And all of a sudden, at the end of the battle, the Midianites are killing each other. Because they're freaked out, because it's in the middle of the night. And like, ah! God didn't need the Israelite swords. He had thousands of swords that were already there, wielded by Midianites, taking each other out. God has ways of solving problems that are not traditional. He has answers to all our problems. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego they're standing on this big plain of Dura. And they are standing in a sea of people that are all flat on their face on the ground, and they're like, hi. If you were to see them, imagine this big plane where you've got three things going, hey, there they are. Extremely obvious that they're not doing what everyone else is doing. Now, at this point, they already had a relationship, to a degree, as much as you could, with Nebuchadnezzar, the king. And his advisors are like, look, those Jews that you really like, yeah, they're not doing what you told them to do. You should kill them now. Now, apparently, Nebuchadnezzar kind of had a soft place in his heart. It's like, all right, so maybe you didn't hear when I had them play the harp and the lute and the sackbut, which is just a fun name to say for an instrument. Maybe you didn't hear it. Never mind that everyone around them heard it. Like, guys, I'm trying to throw you a bone here. Maybe you didn't hear it. I appreciate that, obviously in the written word you don't get tone. And a lot of times in communication, they talk about that the words that you say are only, 20% of what you communicate? That a lot of it is tone. So I am, based on, once again, we'll call it sanctified imagination, I imagine that the tone that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were using was tone. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe they're like, ah! But in my mind, they're talking calm. It's like, so, you guys have this opportunity. And this is one of those verses that just gets me every time I read it. Shadrach, Meshach, by the way, this is Daniel chapter 3, verses 16 through 18, if you wanted to follow along. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. Amen. Imagine that. Telling the king, you have the power to kill us, but we don't really need to defend ourselves. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. Amen. And then the turn. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. You have the power to kill us. Sure. And our God has the power to save us. But even if he doesn't, we're still going to do what our God has told us to do. Amen. That, of course, made Nebuchadnezzar nice and calm. And, why, yes, guys, you know what? You're right. Guys, you can stand up. You don't have to be bowing. Okay, maybe not. He was so livid, he was like, turn it up 7 times hotter than we normally have it at. Maybe, I've heard some people 7 times hotter than you normally have it. I've heard people say 7 times hotter than it's ever been before. I don't know which is the right one. But really, really, really hot. I wish I had a temperature gauge on that thing. I'm curious. Yeah, how many degrees? But it was so hot that the guys that were throwing them into there died because they got burned. And of course, God saved them in a very natural way. He put up a big barrier and they didn't even get in the fire, right? No. They went in the fire. Now, for me, I cook. I cook a lot. I enjoy cooking. I enjoy baking. Here lately, I've gotten even more into baking. I'm really into pizza. We won't get started on pizza because then I won't stop talking about pizza. But I've had multiple places where, for me, I actually did something where I burned myself or I cut myself or whatever, and it hurt. It hurt for a very long time. And as they were dealing with a fire that was so hot that if you're heating them in, and maybe they got, I don't know, maybe if the fire was right where this mat is and they're here, it killed them from there. And they got, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego got into the fire, and they start walking around saying, well, don't you look good today? You too. How are you not dead? I don't know, but good to see you alive and walking around. Is it me or is it a little bright in here? And then all of a sudden, Nebuchadnezzar's looking in, and we threw how many people in there? As he's looking at his dead soldiers out there, how many people are there? He knew how many people, but the math was off. Okay, there was Shadrach, there was Meshach, there was Abednego, and there was... Is that the Son of God there? What's going on here? Now, the conversation that I would love to have also heard was the one going on in the fire where all of a sudden you had, I'm presuming it was Jesus there, obviously before he came down, but Jesus there standing there with them, saying, so, does it feel better now that the ropes are burned off? Got you covered? Here's some water. Some Dasani, some Avion, whichever. The way in which God protected Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, it doesn't make sense. It makes sense in that God protects people, but it doesn't make sense from a purely logical place. Why didn't God just change Nebuchadnezzar's mind? Why didn't he simply cause an uprising that went against Nebuchadnezzar and stopped them before? Kind of want the showy route a little bit. Even if we don't get saved, we're still going to fall. In high school, for me, I had what at that point seemed like a very high-stakes situation. In retrospect, I'm like, oh, well, that was school. But in the moment, it was like, in high school, when you're trying to graduate, that's your whole life. Now, I mentioned before, I have ADHD. And for me, let's give a few details here. Number one, no one ever suggested to me that I had ADHD until I was 24, my senior year in college. And I did the whole squeeze 4 years into 5 plan. And so we're talking my 5th year in college, 2nd semester, a good buddy of mine comes up to me and says, Chris, I think you may have ADHD because I see you struggling with some of the same things I struggle with, and I have ADHD. I'm like, really? And all of a sudden it's like, click, 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 click. Oh. So that was spring of 2002. So for context, I graduated from high school in 1997. So this is about 5 years before that. So I am simply going along thinking that I'm just either lazy or just, I don't know. Everyone's like, why don't you have better grades? No clue. Just haven't been doing my homework. So I was supposed to be studying for this final, my last, one of my last finals. I was my senior year taking English 3. Let that sink in for a moment. English 3, my senior year. We got it? We with me? Second time through English 3. And I was awful at making sure I'd say. We would have to memorize poems for English 3. I did not enjoy memorizing poems. It's like, give me something to do and move around something. It should have been obvious at that moment that I had ADHD, but let's be aside the point. That one time, I did not study for the test, except for memorizing this one poem. And going in to take this test, because usually the poem part was about 1/3 of the test. And so I had about 2/3, and I'm like, I am going to fail this test. But hey, I remember the poem. I go in, I sit down. Lord, please, please help me. I don't know how you're going to do this. Please help me. I open the test and write the poem. Okay, I wrote the poem. Flip it over, and That was the whole test, right there. God wants me to graduate! I passed. I graduated. Fast forward. My wife and I had been wanting to have kids, and nothing happened. We've been married for about 5 years, which means that I was probably about 35 or so. And we decided, what if we were to look into being foster parents, adoptive parents? Okay. So for context, this is 10 years ago this past February. This is February of 2013. And we check it out. We go with some friends of ours who also want to become adoptive parents because they're not able to be parents the traditional way. We end up going through all the 9 weeks of classes that you go through to which is called Pride. It's something required by the state of Texas to become a foster parent, or at least through CPS. We get through all the classes. They do a preliminary walkthrough of our house. Now, at this point, we were living here in not here, but in central El Paso. And we were renting this house where we had the bottom floor, and someone else rented the top floor. And for the top floor people to get to their apartment, they literally walked by our back door. So there was a shared backyard and everything else. Well, CPS took one look at our house and said, yeah, you're never going to get approved here. We're like, couldn't you have told us that before we went through 9 weeks of classes? But we were kind of distraught. We put this in God's hands. What is going on? Why, Lord, did you let us go through all these classes and then nothing? And a year passed, and another year passed, and another year passed. We moved. I got a job. I lost that job. I got another job. There are more jobs in there too. ADHD. So, we, for the state of Texas, they have something called the TARE website, T-A-R-E, Texas Adoption Resource Exchange, where there are literally children listed there where you can, these are children that are ready to be adopted. They are free and clear. Their parental rights have already been terminated. They're there. And there was one that just really felt impressed. This may be the one. I don't know. I can still tell you the TARE ID number on it. It just sticks in my head. And so we looked into it, and we're like, you know what? Let's look into this again. So this is February of 2016. And so we're working on it, and we end up going to all the classes. And then we get a hiccup, partly when in conversations, Amy and I realized that we're on different pages as far as what this looks like for us. For me, I'm like, well, let me start with Amy. Amy, in her mind, was someone 10 and younger. My mind was anywhere between born and 17 years and 364 days. Somewhere in there, I don't care. I really would like to be a dad. And we have discussions, and that kind of puts plans on pause. And so we're still working on things, but we have slowed way down. But we're still praying. It's like, okay, Lord. Okay. 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 No pauses at all. We finally get almost to the point of being certified, and we get this call. So, Mr. Clapp, just to let you know, if you can get this one piece of paperwork filled out today, we will certify you today. Oh, okay. And we'd like to place 4 kids with you today. Oh, okay. In my mind, Lord help me. And all that time that had been spent, all of a sudden, it's, okay, we're doing this now. Okay. So as it turns out, we ended up getting one of the 4. And then 2.5 months later, they're like, all right, so we found this other family that can take all 4. Unless you want to take 2 more right now. All right, so at this point, we're attached to this little baby boy named Max. We pray about it. Okay, Lord, what do? We had a visitation, an in-home visit, and the older girl, or the girl, because there was a girl and there was a boy. The boy was only 2.5 months old. Some of you know him as Zeke. The girl was Carly. And vividly, I remember hearing, that boy hit me. Referring to Max. That boy. It was actually her brother, but it was that boy. Lord, do we really want 3 kids? Because at that point, who knows what's going to happen? And, with fostering, you never know what is going to happen. You never know if the parents are going to get their act together. Because for context, my younger son was born with meth in his system. Mom had meth in her system. And if she got her act together, well, then eventually she could get the kids back. So we're pouring our love, our heart, our soul into these babies. And okay. So we said yes. Okay. Lord, I don't know what's going to happen here, but help us. Please help us. And at that point, all of a sudden we had 3 kids, 2 and under. Okay. So we're trying to figure things out, and of course, having 3 kids under 2, or 2 and under, does not disrupt your life at all. And if you believe that, I've got some property over in Horizon that's sitting right on the ocean. Just throwing that out there. No. So we're moving forward, and all of a sudden, it's 11 months later, and, oh, hey, Mom just had another baby. That's still positive for meth. Okay, Lord. People talking about their cup runneth over with blessings. We were drowning in our blessings. 6 weeks later, we're in the hospital. And something is going on with Genesis, and we don't know what it is. She's in the children's hospital there, close to downtown. And by this point, they had terminated parental rights on, I think they had terminated. No, they hadn't terminated. They had extended that, so they were waiting to see what was going to happen. And if mom had come back with some, because our older three were part of one CPS case, and Genesis was part of a different one. They let us know that if mom came back with some clean drug tests, that there was a possibility that she could get Genesis. And if she got Genesis, there was a legal argument that could be made that if she is fit to watch a 6-week-old baby, she was also fit to watch the other kids. Which meant that while we're here in the hospital, just pouring our souls into this baby that's just crying and doesn't understand why she's getting shots and IVs and everything else, we could be losing all 4 kids within days. Who knows? Lord, we don't understand. What's going to happen here? Why? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding.
Amen.
Turns out mom did not take her drug tests. And the way that the state of Texas looks at it is that if you have a drug test that you don't take, that you miss, it's counted as a presumed positive. So we moved forward. Genesis was able to get out of the hospital. Her nurse, by the way. She got to see Genesis in the hospital there at that point. So fast forward. It's June of 2019. Most of you know that my wife and I are the area coordinators for Pathfinders and Adventurers for this area. And I was speaking at Silver City. And then we were supposed to have a training for the director and his staff out there. And as it turned out, the director was sick that day, but because he lived 70 miles away, no one really knew that until we were already out there. And so they're like, well, which by the way, trying to do a training out in the middle of not in the middle of nowhere, but long ways away from home where you have very little support, gets a little interesting. So it's like, okay, we're going to have one parent do this while the other parent's teaching, and then switch. And so anyway, this is what we were expecting to be doing that day. And we find out, okay, no. So I'm like, you know what? Silver City is a beautiful, beautiful area. Let's go driving, let's go exploring. And we're driving, and you're in the mountains there. It's beautiful. The Gila National Forest. It's just gorgeous. All these mountains, you're going over ridges, and all of a sudden you're just seeing, this is just, cannot get over the view from driving along there. But at the same time, there is almost no cell phone signal whatsoever. So we are driving along. Amy gets a blip of signal somewhere in between Silver City and Truth or Consequences. And she gets a text from her sister. And it just says, 911. And we're like, and at the same time, Carly's getting car sick. Her tummy was not playing nice. So we're dealing with needing to go through very, very curvy, windy roads with a car-sick child, but fast enough that we can get to somewhere that has signal, and then all of a sudden everyone has to go to the bathroom in this area that has no signal and seemingly no bathrooms. We get to, I don't even remember the name of the town, but there literally, we're parked, we're trying to find a bathroom anywhere, and there's just nothing. There's no gas stations or anything. We're like, ah! So many urgent issues at this moment. We finally get out to the signal, and it turns out my mother-in-law has fallen and gone to the hospital. It sounds like she's broken her hip. Okay, Lord. You'll get us through. So my mother-in-law goes to the hospital, ends up going to the rehab hospital, takes about 6 weeks or so. Now, 2019 was also the last time that there was a big international Pathfinder Camp Arena. It was the last one in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, which we were very much planning on going. And so it's coming up August 3rd. We're driving on our way to church, and all of a sudden we're passed by all kinds of police just flying by us. We're like, what's going on? We get into church, and everyone's freaking out. We're like, what's going on? Oh, there was a shooting at Walmart. Ooh. Everyone's getting us away from the front doors, because at El Paso Central there's all those glass doors in the front. I'm like, no, get away. 3 days later, August 6th, and we are at the courthouse because it is finally adoption day for our older 3 kids. And it is also the day that they're going to terminate parental rights for our youngest. And so the termination thing happens first, and come to find out, this detail will come into play later, so I'm planting this seed right now. When they terminate parental rights for Genesis, there's family distant that all of a sudden is interested in Genesis. We're like, well, that was unexpected. Okay. But then, about an hour later, we have a big family celebration because we're adopting Carly, Max, and Zeke. This is fantastic. We've been working on this for like 2.5 years. It's taken way longer than anyone, because normally at CPS, everything's terminated and done within 12 months, 18 months. This has been 2.5 years. And we go out to eat, we go to Chewy's, and we go to bed. The next day, we're leaving for Oshkosh. The plan is we're going to pack and everything else in the morning, and then get in the car in the afternoon, evening, and then just start driving. We wake up in the morning to find out that my mother-in-law has fallen again. So our plans change. She went back to the hospital, and over the course of the next 6 weeks, 2 months, she starts deteriorating. And see, that was August 7, September 29, I think it was. I'm looking at Amy. September 29? 28, off by a day. So September 28, she passes. Now, in the meanwhile, I have this big new thing that happens in that I get a new job. I start working as a computer teacher at Horizon Middle School. And I'm excited, but there's all kinds of crazy going on. Because the kids had had a sub for 6.5 weeks, and if you've ever been a teacher and trying to get control of a class that's been had a sub for 6.5 weeks, especially when it's been a bunch of subs, that's a process. So we're going along, and yeah, at this point, Amy is just, she's struggling. She lost her mom. They had the funeral. couple of weeks, about a week or two later. And a week after that, she goes into the doctor. She's had this, something going on. That evening, I come home from school and she's like, Chris, you need to sit down. Okay. I have cancer. Okay. We get the details. They caught something extremely, extremely early. Amy had been aware of some things that were going on and had gotten in there. And so I forget what the actual term is. Essentially, it's like pre-cancer, but without any help, it will turn into cancer very quickly. So she's like, they need to schedule something. Okay. We're praying. Lord, I don't know what's going on, but Lord, leaning on you, we don't understand what's going on. That was October. In between, she found this out in October. When she had surgery, it was in December. In November, her dad falls and ends up in the ICU for 2 weeks. Was it 2 weeks? Like in 2 weeks. And then ends up in the rehab hospital, and at one point they thought he wasn't going to make it. Okay, Lord. I tell people that, when I'm talking about telling people this, that if you were to write a movie about what happened in this 9-10 month span, people would say, no, that's not realistic. You have to take some of those things out. That's not all that can happen. I promise it did. So, Amy ends up getting surgery. Her dad gets better. He comes out of the hospital. He's doing all right. Still walker and everything else. December, Amy had surgery. She was convinced that she was going to be able to go back to work in about a week or two. And it was Amy, was it 6 weeks or 8 weeks? 8 weeks. 8 weeks later, when she goes back, it is February, close to the end of February, almost the end of the 9 week grading period, because she's also a teacher. And we're coming up on spring break of 2020, where nothing at all happened whatsoever. Things got back to normal. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. We don't know what's happening so many times. Sometimes we think we have a handle on it. Sometimes we think that we are okay. Other times, we know that things are not going right. And we think that we see a way out, and it turns out, nope, another window closed. Another door closed. In this period, I also had gone without a job for about a year or so. And I kept interviewing. I was trying to get into becoming a teacher. I passed my tests back in January and February, and nothing was happening. I kept interviewing. I probably interviewed at about 20 different schools, and nothing was happening. And then I got put in the position where I'm at, and the support that I've gotten from my administration has been phenomenal. I've grown as a teacher in ways that I had no idea I'd be able to. God had a plan. I had no idea what it was. Now, the little secret today is that we're talking about all this. And quite honestly, I needed to hear this too. one of our early church founders talked about, we have nothing to fear except that we forget how God is leading and has led in the past. Sometimes we need to hear it too. Sometimes we need to revisit how God has led in our own lives, because we need to hear it, because sometimes we forget. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. That's our message for today.
Amen.